Hello everybody, welcome to episode 200 of Shelf Review, where today I have a very important and very special movie to go over for this 200th milestone. Schindler's List, released in 1993. This movie, I'm just going to say right now, is within my top three. This movie deserves to be seen as one of the greatest films of all time. It is a masterclass of cinema, and it is a beautiful story. Not beautiful necessarily, but like a grasping story. It holds you by the throat and just keeps you there the entire runtime. So I'll just kind of get on to how I got into Schindler's List or figured out about Schindler's List. So obviously everyone knows about Schindler's List. It's one of the most renowned movies of all time, which it deserves to be known as. Because, so I heard about it, I put it on my watch list, but I was quite daunted by the length. It's a 3 hour and 15 minute movie, so it's quite a dedication. But that 3 hour and 15 minutes is not wasted at all. I wish it was longer. But yeah. So this movie, I was daunted. So ultimately, I was like, you know what? I'm probably gonna have quite a bit of free time at work today. So I'm gonna start watching Schindler's List. So last night, started watching Schindler's List, and then I watched it at the work day today. Ultimately, finished it up tonight, and I really am speechless. This movie is great. I've watched a lot of the other, well, not a lot of the other, but multiple other like renowned films, like The Godfather, and I highly respect The Godfather. I thought it was a great movie for its time and all of that, and I deeply enjoyed it. I love the aesthetic and the action and all that, the grittiness to it. But I don't believe it's one of the greatest films of all time. However, Schindler's List, it is one of the greatest films of all time. That is hands down, in my opinion. And I believe so many other people believe that. I know that's not a new opinion. But because of that status, I'm not really going to go into too detailed rant on the story like I usually do in my reviews, because I want you to go watch this for yourself. I don't want to spoil it. However, there will be some spoiler stuff throughout this, so if you want to go watch it yourself, go do so now and come back and see what I have to say about it later, obviously. But don't worry about coming back if you don't want to, but yeah. So I'm just going to kind of get into what made me love this movie so much. And I'll just kind of get into a brief synopsis of what happens before I kind of go into that. So, with Schindler's List, who we are introduced to as the main character is Oskar Schindler. And he is an industrialist who is looking to make it big. And so he goes about, and this is at the beginning of World War II, and we see as he ultimately decides, you know what, I want cheap labor to make pots, pans, and ceramics, enamelware. So he's like, he ends up consulting this one dude by the name of Isaac Stern. And he's speaking with him, and he's like, yo, what's the cheapest labor I can get? He's like, Jews are cheap, but Poles are, you gotta pay her a little bit more for them. So he's like, you know what, give me a bunch of Jews. So he brings in a bunch of Jews into his factory. They start working for him and all of that. And then we see as the downfall of the Holocaust starts to happen a little bit more. We see that people are starting to be more oppressed and everything. We see as people are kind of starting to get shipped off. We see as ghettos are established and all that. And so Schindler has to fight to keep his workforce. He's like, yo, I want to make some money. So he ultimately keeps fighting for his workforce. And ultimately, this leads to everything continuing to kind of go downhill. Ultimately, he follows his workforce to an internment camp, or a work camp, well, not a concentration camp at this point. But we see as he ultimately falls into this camp, is able to convince the Nazi higher-ups to allow them to continue working for him so he can keep making money and making the Nazi army money via the production of these items, and also eventually ammunition and like other assorted stuff. So we see as he continues to follow the Jews throughout, and then ultimately as stuff progresses, he begins to feel for the Jews, and instead of just using them for cheap labor, he puts them into his labor to save them, to keep them from the oppression and destruction that is being dallied out by the Nazis. And so we just kind of see as this story progresses, ultimately Schindler becomes a massive ally of the not the Nazis, but the Jews, and he kind of just helps them all the way throughout, and he makes it his life's dedication to save these Jews. He ultimately ends up sacrificing all of his wealth just to save these Jews, which have been working for him. Now, I will get on to some of the things that made me love this movie, and the first big thing that absolutely made me fall in love with this movie, like I said, my top three of all time, suspense. This movie does suspense better than any other movie I have ever seen in my entire life. I've been watching movies since I can remember watching the first movie I can ever remember watching was Avengers when I was 4 years old. So I have watched many movies. I've always loved watching movies. Like I said, that's how me and my dad connect like very well, because we both love movies. We both love music. We have a lot of stuff in common, but movies is one of the things that we really connect on. Because we both really generally just enjoy any movie. However, I'm a little bit more picky when it comes to movies, and Schindler's List, like I said, it it's does suspense. Back to kind of the thing, it does suspense better than any movie I've ever seen. Horror movie, I've watched some of the biggest horror movies, some of the best horror movies, and none of them did suspense as good as Schindler's List. It just, that's a fact. Schindler's List has the best suspense in all of cinema. And I'll try to give you some examples. So here I'm going to get into more like story-based stuff, so just block your ears if you don't want to hear it. So, one of the first major points of suspense we see as Schindler is looking for Stern, because Stern kind of runs his business. Schindler doesn't do that much. Schindler keeps up the face. Schindler has to be the head because he is a member of the Nazi party, and obviously a Jew cannot be the head of his business because then they would get shut down. And we see at one point, as everyone is starting to get shipped off, so a lot of these Jews are getting shipped off because they're non-essential workers. And Stern, in fact, forgot his card to indicate that he was an essential worker. So he's been packed on this train to get shipped off. So we see as ultimately Schindler ends up figuring out, yo, Stern is on this train, I need to go save him. So he ends up coming up to the Nazis, and he's like, yo, I'm one of my, I guess, essential workers is on this thing. I need to get off, and I need to get him off. And they're just kind of speaking with him. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. So ultimately, Schindler pulls up the move of, tell me your names. And ultimately, they end up telling their names, and they get to speaking. And he's like, yeah, you'll be in southern Russia by the end of this, by the end of the month. And they're ultimately like, you know what? Let's go get Stern. So we see as they go to search for Stern, they can't find him at first, but then the train starts moving. It's like, oh crap, it's dire here. Schindler's about to lose his entire business because Stern is about to get shipped off. However, they keep searching. Ultimately, they find him. They're able to get the train stopped, and Stern is saved. Now, that moment of suspense is one of the lesser ones throughout the movie. So then I will get on to like the next big moment of suspense. This moment of suspense, well, I don't know if I want to discuss this first, because actually I will discuss the. Yeah, I will go over this one first. So, we see as a worker who is a rabbi is working for Schindler, and we see as the Nazi party ends up coming in, they're like watching over him and all that. Actually, no, we'll go back to that one. I'll first want to discuss the ghetto stuff. So, ultimately, after all the Jews are ultimately shipped to a ghetto, we see it's divided in two, with the infirm being on one side, the healthy being on the other. And we see at one point as this ghetto is raided, the suspense in this raid is palpable, and this is where Schindler really starts to feel for the Jews, because him and his mistress go and watch it from a hilltop, and they see as the Jews are slaughtered in a bloodbath. Children, women, men, everyone is killed. Not everyone, but all of the, I guess, worthless or ones who are trying to escape are slaughtered like animals. And we see as everyone goes throughout, they're killing. We see at night as people are playing the piano, the Nazis are playing the piano to the death of these individuals. They're being found in hiding spots and all that, drug out, shot, all of this crazy stuff. It's very suspenseful. But one of the things that was also very suspenseful is a brief moment. Okay, so this entire movie is filmed in black and white. Now, there are 3 exceptions of color at the end and 2 occurrences with this entity I'm about to talk with. This little girl. Schindler is watching from the hilltop, and he is watching this little girl who is in a red dress traverse through this onslaught, this desolation that's been laid out before her. And she's going about trying to navigate this, and it's just, she seems like such a, I guess, it's to show how displaced this child is among all this slaughter. We see this image of purity amongst infinite bloodshed from unspeakable distance. And Schindler is, we also see her because Schindler is specifically focused on her, that's why she's in color, but I believe she is highlighted to show the juxtaposition here. And we see as she walks about, and we're biting our nails the entire time. Is she about to die? Is she going to get shot? No, the girl does not end up getting shot. She ends up traveling along. Ultimately, we don't see her till about, like, I believe an hour or so more into the movie. And so, like I said, this is the point in which Schindler begins to sympathize with the Jews, because we see prior with one instance, because there was this worker who had one arm, and this dude wanted to thank Schindler. He was like, yo, thank you so much, Schindler, for saving me. I wouldn't be really useful without you to, I guess, back me. And Schindler was like, oh crap, I don't really worry about that. And then he ends up speaking with Stern. He's like, Stern, why do you give me a worker with one arm? What use is he? And he's like, very useful, because Stern's trying to save his own people, because Stern is a Jew. And we see as he kind of talks about this, and ultimately this one-armed Jew is picked out amongst the Nazis, and he is shot. And that was a very tense moment as well. But yeah, so it's kind of that discussion. Like I said, Schindler becomes to defend the Jews more and more after the desolation at the ghetto. So my next big moment of suspense I like to discuss is when we get introduced to this rabbi, the rabbi is a very efficient worker with machines. He makes hinges, and we see as the Nazi Party members end up coming in, specifically, I believe it was Amon Goth, who is kind of like the main antagonist of a part of this movie, while also being a kind of odd character. Amon Goth is, I'm going to speak about him quite a bit later on. But yeah, so we see as the rabbi is making all this stuff, and then Amon comes in. He's like, "Yo, why are you going so fast with this, but have such a small pile?" And they ultimately end up bringing him out. I don't know if this was Goth or not yet. Crap, why am I forgetting already? It's a 3-hour movie, so you're gonna have to give me a little bit of credence here. But we see as these Nazi members end up coming in, they're like, "Yo, why you got such a small pile?" And ultimately, they end up bringing him out, put a gun to his head, click, get closer, click, get even closer, click, 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 nothing. They end up giving him another gun, click, another gun, click. The rabbi was not meant to die here. This suspense was insane. We see each time as the rabbi is flinching. It's getting worse at the time because each time could be the end of his life. But we hear click, click, click. He never dies. And ultimately, we see as he starts begging for his life, he's like, "I had such a small pile because there was a alteration at the early part of my day, and I had to focus on that rather than doing my main task." And ultimately, the Nazi member ends up whapping him over the head, pistol whipping him, but he survives this. And then we see as he ultimately ends up going to Schindler and thanking him for, I guess, allowing him to continue working and all of that. But yeah, so the rabbi lives throughout this entire story. The rabbi plays quite an integral, not really an integral role, but an important role later on and all of that. And I guess, let me see, what's the next moment? So I guess I'll mention the first time that Schindler met Amon Goth. And we see as he ends up coming in here, and it's obviously very tense because Amon is very, almost aggressive towards Schindler, and this moment wasn't like as high suspense as the previous one, but it was still very tense. Like it was palpable. And then I guess another big one would be when Schindler. Okay, so we see as multiple of not necessarily, but we see as multiple people are being shipped off to go to concentration camps. And we see as they're out in the hot summer, and the Nazi members are just kind of sitting there watching, Almonds watching, and Schindler ends up pulling up, and he's like, "You know, it'd be really cool if we sprayed them all with water hoses." And we see as the Nazis are like, "What?" for a second, and then they get to laughing, "Oh yes, that would be so cruel," to give them hope. And so they actually don't end up suspecting Schindler of doing anything here. He goes to give them water and all of that, and that was just another very tense moment. Now, one of the most tense moments in this movie, beside the rabbi almost getting shot, is when it is Schindler's birthday, and we see as everyone coming to give him cake and all of that. He's kissing all the women because Schindler is a womanizer. He has a wife, but he partakes in other women pretty frequently throughout this movie. But yeah, so we see as it's his birthday, and everyone ends up coming up, and we see as a little girl and a Jewish woman end up pulling up on behalf of the workers to give him a cake. And Schindler gives this Jewish woman a big old sloppy one right on the mouth. And all the German officers surrounding him are like... And ultimately, Schindler gets imprisoned because of this. Only briefly, though, because he's able to get his friends in high places to get him out of here. And Alman kind of speaks on his behalf as well, because over the extent of the story, Alman and Schindler become friends. Like, they become acquainted. And that's one thing I would really like to speak on is, how Alman and Schindler's relationship develops. At first, it's very tense and all of that, but ultimately, we see as they drink together and everything, we see at one point as Alman's entire philosophy has changed for a brief moment because of what Schindler says. And Schindler, they're discussing power, and Schindler ultimately says, the one who holds power is the one who has everything and still pardons those who are essentially worthless to them. And we see as Alman goes around pardoning Jews for a time, because what Alman's been doing, like we see when we first get introduced to him, he's shooting Jews from his villa up top just for the fun of it. But he goes about pardoning people here. That is until one person commits an unforgivable sin. We see as, I believe his name was Lasek, who was a helper and kind of like a stable boy, and also a house servant for Alman, ultimately ends up messing up with one of his saddles. And then we see as Alman just straight up kills him afterwards with a shot as he was walking around. But yeah, so we see that with Amon, and we see as Amon ultimately develops into kind of like an ally for Schindler, because when Schindler is trying to keep all of the Jews that he has from going to Auschwitz toward the end of the movie, we see as ultimately they end up coming to a deal where Schindler well, not necessarily, well, he does pay Amon for each of the Jews, that each of the 1,100 that he saves, he ends up paying him an absurd amount of money for this, and they make a deal, and ultimately Amon puts himself on the line here to help his friend Schindler. So yeah, I guess back to the suspenseful moments now. Now I'd say probably the most suspenseful moment throughout this entire movie is the shower scene. So we see as, due to an improper mess up on the, I guess, documentation, we see as the female Jews who worked for Schindler are sent off to Auschwitz, because though he'd already paid for their survival and the men had already been transported to where they were going to work now, the women accidentally got shipped off to Auschwitz, and we see as they're shaved and all that, they're stripped naked, and they're put in this shower. And previously in the movie, we saw when all the women were in the bunks, one of them was telling a bedtime story, where she was mentioning about how these Jews who were at concentration camps, who were given soap and all that, put in the showers and then gassed, were all killed by this method. So everyone in this bunker has heard this, and this story has spread as well. And they ultimately all have been denying. They're like, no, if someone was there, they would have been dead, so this can't be a real story. However, they're now in these showers. We see they are all in the showers, and the doors are shut, and they start freaking out. They start screaming, crying, shrieking, and they're just, some of them are just watching the shower heads. They're like, what is going to come out of that? It's the gas. I'm done for. And we see as it sits briefly, and then the showers turn on. It's water. They did not get gassed. They were not meant to be gassed here. Water sprays down on them. We see as they rejoice in this water, knowing that it is, in fact, not the gas that they have been expecting. And that moment was tense. Like, it grabs you. But yeah, also there's like another moment of suspense toward the end where ultimately we see as the Nazis are defeated, and the ones who work as guards around Schindler's manufacturing area come in, and he brings all of them and gives them the speech about how the Germans have been defeated and how he's going to have to leave because he is a member of the Nazi party, since he will be hunted. And ultimately he ends up speaking with the Nazi officers, and he's like, yo, if you want to kill all these Jews right now, it's your time. And he's like, you can do that, or you can go back to your mothers and families as heroes and fighters, warriors, instead of murderers. And they ultimately all have been deciding to leave, but there was a brief moment there where it's like, hold up, are they just going to gun down everyone? Are they going to gun down Schindler? But they ultimately do not. This movie oftentimes diverts expectations by, because you've been exposed to so much dreary, so much awful, heinous stuff throughout this entire movie that you're expecting the worst. However, you get the good most of the time in these suspenseful situations. And that is just super cool. Now, one thing I also wanted to mention is the reoccurring elements in the story. So, like I said, the red girl, I explained her. And we see, like I said, early on in the ghetto, she lives, she survives. And we see as time worsens after they get to the internment camp with Amon and all of that, times worsen and the war progresses until ultimately they're slaughtering Jews, they're burning them and everything. And we see as at one point the Jews are working the fields and burying these bodies and all of that. And it's only a brief moment, but we see in a wheelbarrow as a young girl in a red dress or a red little jacket passes by in a wheelbarrow, a charred corpse. That was sad. That was a super sad moment. And it was rough. I was like, oh, I was not expecting that at all. But yeah, then also the reoccurring elements of two characters, Oleg and Danka. Oleg and Danka are two very young characters that we see in the ghetto scene where we first introduced to them, and they survive this entire thing. We see multiple times where it appears that they're going to be shipped off, and then at one point they are in fact shipped off, because at one point we see as everyone's brought out for a yearly physical, they're tested and all that, but the kids are left inside, and everyone else is butt booty naked. Like, you see a lot of nudity in this movie, and you see everything. Like, you see full-on genitalia, like under lower genitalia as well. Like, you're gonna see that stuff if you watch that movie. But yeah, so we see this, and everyone's naked, they're vulnerable, and the people who have been deemed healthy are rejoicing. They're like, yo, yeah, we're gonna survive, we're not gonna get pushed off. But then they start seeing, once they're getting reclothed and all of that, as the reason why the kids were left behind. This was to transport and capture them. We see as all the children are captured, and they are sent off to somewhere. and everyone is freaking out and all of that. Now, a lot of the kids did hide. They were able to hide. And we just see as the parents start rushing towards the cars, though. They're like, no, they're calling the names of their children, super sad. And we see as two of them are calling, we see as Danka's mother is calling Danka, and we see as one of them is crying for Oleg. Both of these kids ended up hiding. They survived. Now, as it progresses, we see also as Danka is sent along with the other women to Auschwitz. And we see here as it's very possible that she will die, but she ends up surviving Auschwitz as well. Danka lives all the way through the story, and so does Oleg, because there's a scene at the very end where everyone's coming to Schneider's grave, not Schneider, Schindler, coming to Schindler's grave because he died in 1974 after the events of this, and they're coming to his grave and all of that, and they're putting rocks on him. We see that Oleg and Danka survived all of this, which is insane. Super cool. I love that reoccurring element. But yeah, also another reoccurring character was Helena. Now, Helena was the predominant maidservant of Alman Goth. We see as Alman deeply treasures her, and he would likely be in love with her if she were not a Jew. We see at one point a very tense moment as well, where he comes downstairs where Helena hides, and he's speaking with her, and it seems as if he's going to do unsavory things to her. But ultimately he decides he isn't, and he absolutely beats her. He throws a shelf on her. She is beaten badly just for being a Jew. But ultimately we see also when Schindler is trying to pay Alman for his Jews, we see as he tries to negotiate for Helena, and Alman's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take, I want to take her to Vienna, but I can't, so I'm going to go put her down like a dog out in the forest. And Schindler's like, you know what, let's play a game of blackjack. Whoever gets a natural 21, if you get a natural 21, you get to keep Helena. However, if I get a natural 21, I'll pay you a certain amount for Helena. And we ultimately see as Helena, in fact, lives. She is saved by Schindler, and she lives out her time as well, happily. After the Holocaust, obviously. But yeah, so then I guess I'll get into the emotion of this movie. Now, this movie is obviously very emotional, because we're seeing people go through the worst of the worst, being brought down to such low circumstances. We see as, one of the big ones that stuck out to me was when the move to Auschwitz is announced. We see ultimately as, in fact, Stern's name is on the list to get shipped off to Auschwitz, and he ultimately gets to talking with Schindler, and it's very emotional because we see as Schindler's like, well, I would say I'd give you a drink, or we'd share a drink whenever all these Jews had been saved and the war was over, all this had ended. But then Stern goes, I might need to take that drink now, because he knows his demise is coming. However, it doesn't, because they end up making Schindler's List with all the names of the Jews on that, end up commissioning it to Alman, who ultimately makes the deal with them. But yeah, so that was a sad scene. Like that almost got me. And then I get to the scene that legit almost made me cry. I have never cried at a movie. Well, I cried once at a movie, and it was Dog's Journey when the beagle dies. I have a very soft spot in my heart for beagles, and because I've owned one myself. I love that dog, and that part got me. I mean, I was also like, well, I was probably 14 or so, so that's not really excusable as an age, but still. We get to the end of this movie, where we see as all of the Jews have been saved, and Schindler is preparing to leave off with his wife. And we see as all the Jews are thinking and all that, we see as Stern comes up and he's like, you've saved 1,100 people here. You did so good. And then Schindler starts breaking down because he's like, I could have saved more. He ends up looking at all the items he has. He's like, if I could have just made more money, I could have saved more Jews. I could have saved more generations. And we see as he goes to his car and he's like, why do I own this car? It could have been 10 Jews. Alman would have bought it. Then he takes his Nazi pen and he's like, this could have been 2 lives. And he breaks down. And we see as he breaks down his wife and Stern obviously come to console him. And then all the other Jews come around him and try and console him. I just, oh my gosh, that almost got to me. That legit, just speaking about it again, almost brought tears to my eyes. Because it's so sad, because Schindler did good. He was the best of the Nazis. I legit researched this afterwards, and Schindler was in fact buried on Mount Zion. The only Nazi to be buried on Mount Zion because of how many Jews he saved, how good he did. However, he doesn't see it as if he succeeded. He's like, I could have saved so many more people if I would have just been better. And he breaks down because of this. And it's super sad because he did phenomenal. But he knows he could have saved more. He could have done more. But that just wasn't in the cards. And so ultimately we see as the Jews end up getting them to getting Schindler and his wife Amelia to swap into their clothes so that they can ultimately be shipped off and not be caught as prisoners. Now, one of the more satisfying things we get to see at the end of this movie is Almond is hung ultimately because of his crimes. But yeah, so I don't know why I mentioned that in the emotional part, but like those two parts in the movie were the ones that got closest to like me boohooing a little bit. But yeah, I guess that's all I really wanted to speak about. I think like the coloration, I think that's all I really have to say. That movie was great. I would give that movie a 10 out of 10. Like, I know there's multiple movies that I would probably give a 10 out of 10. However, this movie deserves a 10 out of 10. It is a great movie. It is a phenomenal piece. It's not only good because it's a very good piece of historical fiction, even though it is based on a true story. It is good because it is a masterpiece. It is filmed phenomenally. It is, I guess, thematically very pleasing. It is emotionally pleasing. It is just phenomenal all around. It's a great movie. I cannot speak its praises high enough. I know so many people have glazed this movie, and it deserves the glaze. It is a masterpiece of fiction, or at least of cinema. Like, it's so funny because like you watch this movie and you're like, I don't even know if I've watched any others. I watched Jaws, so I've watched some Spielberg. I've watched Jurassic Park too, but like I've watched some Spielberg stuff, and I was like coming into this, I was like, okay, this is '93, and I was like, dang, that's not too far after E.T. E.T. was in '82, and I'm watching this, and I've never watched E.T. personally, and I'm like, what the heck? This is some big juxtaposition because we're getting straight deaths, beatings, nudity, complete nudity, intercourse going on. So yeah, it's most certainly different from other Spielberg stuff, but like, it's so good. I would highly recommend watching this movie to anyone. Like, if you watch any movie within like the next, I don't even know, whenever you have time, watch Schindler's List. It is a absolute must watch. But yeah, I think that's all like the glaze I really have to give out to it, all the review that I really have for it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this review of Schindler's List, and that's all I really have for the big episode 200 of Shelf Review. So once again, thank you very much for watching.